Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Watier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Watier, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Doing fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's conversation. This episode is coming at you on Christmas Eve. So first and foremost, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Early New Year, even though we get to wish it to you next week's episode too. Excited for the last few weeks and the last challenge that we had, and just pumped to bring you a new resource over the last couple of weeks, last week and this week, for things to set you up for success, for ultimate success in 2025. So we're going to be dropping a new ultimate blood sugar guide. We have the lab training that we did last week. So just kind of really honing in on, 2 weeks ago, really honing in on tools that we can have to start the year or regain momentum if you've lost it through the holidays. So we had the holiday conversation last week. The week before that, we talked about labs and blood work and really what metrics we should be looking at. Today, we're going to really dive into blood sugar and the debate on its importance and really just a full encompassing conversation around that, give you the resources you need. So excited to roll to end 2024, Tommy, with these intentional conversations and intentional action steps, and more excited just to start 2025 off on the right foot. So Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Let's dive in, Tommy, to blood sugar and creating kind of a reference frame and some action steps on things we can do on a day-to-day basis with fasting, with a fasting lifestyle, and really kind of lay that out on what that looks like. Now, in all of these episodes, if you're new to the podcast, welcome. Thanks for giving us a shot. Thanks for listening in. Hopefully you find what we do valuable. If you want to learn more about Tommy, myself, our journey, how fasting transformed our lives, why we do what we do week in and week out, why we have our challenges and our coaching and all the resources and the programs, head back to episode 1, give it a listen. If you're a long-term OG, you've been with us for a while, you've been on this journey with us along the way. Thank you again for always dropping those wonderful 5-star reviews. Giving us the feedback, sending in the questions, engaging. We really, truly are grateful for just the millions of downloads and the impact that we've been able to make. And that's our mission. We want to continue to empower you to know that health is in your hands, that you have a different choice, that you can get off the dieting roller coaster, that eat less, move more, track calories, drama, llama-filled, black and white mentality. We want to empower you to start 2025 here with today's conversation. So, we are going to talk blood sugar. Now, some of you are going, okay, when you think blood sugar, you think diabetes, you think diabetics.
Mm-hmm.
I want to kind of back the truck up about 30 years.
Okay.
And talk about blood sugar from a foundational metabolic health perspective and how fasting is a really powerful lever upstream, which will get you a tremendous amount of downstream benefit in the long term.
Yeah. So when we back up into blood sugar, knowing that everybody has blood sugar cycles, regulations, circadian rhythms, spikes after a meal, you have changes in your blood sugar happening from hour to hour,
which are normal
throughout the day. Right. And these things are normal. And so we don't have to be in an abnormal range or have been labeled or diagnosed a certain thing to want to or need to know, kind of to have a bit of an understanding of what's happening within our blood sugar. It's helpful no matter where you are in your fasting journey or weight loss journey, or maybe weight maintenance and body composition journey, because your blood sugar affects other things that are very, very important to Scott. Like you mentioned, your metabolic health. Your blood sugar directly relates to what your insulin response is doing within the pancreas, what your muscles are able to do, what your liver is able to do as far as fuel mobilization, utilization, or fuel storage, which could be problematic if you've been excessively storing fat as well, that's actually directly driven by your blood sugar levels. So the physiology and the metabolism and the metabolic links here are very, very important. So that's exactly why we want to zoom out so we can get a broader understanding, and then zoom back in so we can kind of get into the nitty gritty too.
So let's go over the basics. Just first and foremost, you talked about those fluctuations, right? So blood sugar or glucose, right? So glucose in your bloodstream is the body's primary energy source. So levels rise and fall after eating, or as your body uses or stores glucose as glycogen.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, this is a normal physiological process. Just like when you talk about cortisol, people think, oh, I have high cortisol. Cortisol is so bad for you. Well, if without cortisol, we would die. Because cortisol initiates the fight or flight, life-saving sympathetic response. Now, a chronic state of high cortisol or low cortisol, yes, you're going to have hormonal imbalances and all the things that come with that. But same thing goes for blood sugar. It's a normal metabolic process. Now, the study that came out in 2018, University of North Carolina, and then it was really publicized in 2020-21 during the pandemic, was that 88% of the population was metabolically unhealthy. Well, one of the indicators is we're going to look at, we talked about this on the lab episode a couple episodes ago. One of the key indicators is, what is your blood sugar doing? The problem is it's a downstream metric. So the problem starts in the skeletal muscle. It starts in your on your cell receptors. It starts in your pancreas. It shows up in your liver, in your liver enzymes, long before it ever pops on a fasting blood sugar or an A1C number, right?
Yeah.
So you want to learn more about that, go back to that episode. It's kind of heavy. We nerd out a little bit, but we also give you the infographic that kind of goes with it in terms of the normal ranges. So you eat something, blood sugar is now in your bloodstream. A very small amount can be stored there. So it either gets shuttled into your skeletal muscle, it gets shuttled into your liver and stored as short-term glycogen or energy stores, or then if you have a dysfunctional blood sugar response, or chronic spikes or chronic elevations or chronic highs to lows and lows to highs, then you're going to have the ability or propensity to end up with creating certain forms of inflammation and ultimately fat storage. So you're not going to have a normal fluctuation or a normal signal. You're going to have an abnormal curve, so to speak. So we want to talk about like what the basics are from the research shows from what we call, or the use of CGMs or continuous glucose monitors. These are things that you wear that will give you real-time data. And now that this has become more mainstream, not for diabetics, but for overall health and wellness, you can see real-time responses to food. You can see real-time responses to stress, to lack of sleep, to poor hydration, to exercise. So everyone's a little bit different in terms of where they are, but there is a normal reference range that we want to talk about.
Yeah, that's a great way to kind of put it. And when we're talking about the normal reference range, it's kind of like, okay, where am I right now? So if you're listening to this and you've never seen what your blood sugar is in real time, then your range might be different from the optimal physiology range or even the quote unquote normal range. Because if you do have weight to lose, then that can be a driver where your average blood sugar might be higher than where you want it, than the normal range and way above the kind of optimal range. But, you know, like for a healthy individual, you're mostly going to see blood sugars in the range of somewhere around between 70 and 140 loosely, right?
Yep.
Loosely. Now, for me personally, on some of my longer fasts, I've seen numbers in the high 40s and low 50s, feeling really, really, really good. And those have been actually times when I also saw higher ketone numbers as well, because those are longer fasts. So the fasting numbers, that range kind of tightens up to the lower end of the side, maybe 70 to 80, 85, 90. And it could be even a little bit lower than that too. It just depends on the length of the fast. And again, your level of metabolic flexibility too. Now,
if we were to look at the normal range, which we talked about a couple episodes ago for fasting glucose levels, you're going to be anywhere from, 80 to 100, right? And then as you go to 100 and 125, you're pre-diabetic, 125 above your diabetic, right? But what the CGM data, the continuous glucose monitor data shows is that, and we agree at this, that the fasting glucose levels should be really under 85 or 86. So from about 70 to about that 85 or 86 range. Anything above that, you're really entering into that metabolic dysfunction or that potentially pre-diabetic state. Now that's where I was when I had my insulin that was way out of whack, unknown to me, because that's not a normal routine lab test. So again, go back and listen to that episode if you want to deep dive into that. But your 24-hour like average, like if you think about going back to math class and you just think of a sine wave or a cosine wave, kind of like that wave signal, right? That bell curve kind of curve. Yeah. That's going to be what your blood sugar looks like in terms of fluctuations throughout the day. So when we look at the CGM data versus what the clinical data says, the clinical data is going to have a lot more flexibility, right? Isn't going to be as kind of strict or as muted in terms of the peaks and the valleys, like I had mentioned with the normal fasting glucose levels. So what we want to see ideally for a 24 hours, somewhere you oscillate about 90% of the time, you're between 80 and 100 in terms of your average. When you eat a meal, within 2 to 3 hours post meal, you want to see that blood sugar return to the normal range. And you don't really want to see it go over about a 30 to 40 milligram per deciliter increase from your pre-meal level. So 90% of the day, you should be really oscillating from 70 to about 110. Now, what you mentioned was, and I see this too, when I was wearing mine a couple of months ago, I wore it for a month. I do it a couple times a year now just to kind of see where I'm at. I was fighting an infection. I had COVID. I had antibiotic use. I had, sadly, all this other crap going on. I did an IV infusion. I had a 400 reading. So there's all this variability that can happen. But on a standard operating procedure, like a week-to-week, month-to-month basis, you really want to stay rarely go above 140 and rarely go below 60. Now, I'll push back on the 60 if you're doing extended fasts and you get down into the 40s and 50s and your ketones are high, that's fine, but you don't want to live there. Right. Because you're going to be you're not going to feel good in therapeutic ketosis. Like you're just going to feel like crap at some point because your body's like going to be like, okay, just stop, repair, lay down, take a break. Like we want to come in and out of ketosis.
Yeah. And, so when I first started wearing a CGM, maybe, cause I'll do it a couple times a year too, Scott, just like you. But maybe, I don't know, it might've been like a year and a half ago, let's say something like that. And when I first started wearing it, I would see that I would have these spikes and probably when I first started, I would see some numbers, like big spikes, like especially a late night restaurant meal. Yep. And especially if there was a drink involved with that meal too, then I might see something in like the 160s. I don't think I went above like in the 160s, but a few months later, continuing to work on, some of those deliberate choices, and then also just continuing to work on my metabolic flexibility in the meantime. If I made the same choice maybe 6 or 8 months later, then that 162 spike maybe had become like a 148 spike. So seeing that like those peaks start to lessen, the volatility there, and then the area under the curve start to shorten up as well, was a nice positive reinforcement that I was making strides along with my metabolic flexibility.
So let's recap the numbers. So 70 to 140 is the range you want to be in for about 90% of the day. Ideally, about 70 to 110 with minimal spikes over that mark. I'm not there yet. When I wear my CGMs, I'm still probably up in that mean of like probably about 10 to 15 points higher than that, which that might just be me. Okay. But the research clearly suggests that being lower, 72, 70 to 85, somewhere in that range is really ideal for long-term health. So why does it matter? So there's this dissension out there in the calorie, eat less, move more, research-based world where the dogmatic side of things, in my opinion, where it is, we shouldn't worry about this. It's a normal part of physiology. I can eat sugar for 30 days and still lose weight. Well, the reality is if you don't have any metabolic dysfunction, then you probably can. But if you do, then it's not going to work out in your favor. So people are like, don't worry about the blood sugar spikes. Just eat within moderation, stay within your calorie numbers. That didn't work for me.
Sometimes that's not enough.
Sometimes it's not enough, right? So I agree with it, but we do need to look at where we are when it comes to our blood sugar because it is connected to so many other things. So first of all, why do we want to avoid these big spikes and dips? Well, never mind does it change our mood and make us hangry and affect our sleep and our relationships and how we parent and all. I'm just talking personally here. but we get fatigue and cravings and with these
Yeah.
big spikes. But the reality is, we have clients all the time that'll be like, my post meal energy crashes, my dips completely stopped once we started to mute the peaks and the valleys and try to get this range more within a normal, acceptable kind of oscillation, right? So if you've never tracked before, something like a Keto Mojo, you can get the link, something like a CGM, those things can give you those real-time insights, and we don't have to obsess over every little thing you eat. We want to look at the trends. We want to look at the averages, but knowing where you stand on this really does matter for the long term, because what the research shows is when we look at what this causes, it causes oxidative stress. It causes activating immune cells and keeping vasculature in a state of elevated cardiovascular risk. It increases monocyte production in bone marrow, leading to those cells being inserted into atherosclerotic plaques. It leads to diabetes and all the metabolic syndrome situations and comorbidities that comes with that. It also activates neutrophils, and that's going to promote more forms of inflammation. We know inflammation is the root cause of so many chronic health conditions.
Yeah.
So the reality is it's like, okay, well, what's the biggest lever that we can pull to get the most bang for our buck? Well, one is exercise, and two is getting your blood sugar in check. And that's why we believe fasting is such a powerful tool for everyone that has weight to lose or that wants to maintain health and longevity.
Yeah. Optimizing metabolic health is like, you don't have to have weight to lose to need that, to want that. Right. And then that oxidative stress that you just mentioned, that's the beginning part of the cascade that leads to hardening of the arterial walls, that leads to the cardiovascular disease, and then also the cerebrovascular disease that leads to things like earlier onset dementia and neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's as well. So these are all metabolically related, and they all start with the blood sugar. It doesn't end there, but that's the beginning part of the cascade. And again, that's why everybody needs to understand a little bit better about what's going on with their blood sugar, not just diabetics, like has been talked about for so long, right?
Right. Understood. So let's talk about the second part of the conversation, was like how fasting plays a role in the blood sugar regulation. So insulin, which is your light switch on off for fat burning. Now, it's not a black and white scenario. It's a rolling thing. There's always going to be fat oxidation and muscle catabolism or anabolism taking place, meaning muscle building or muscle breakdown, depending on your activity level. There's going to be digestion that's taking place, and there's always it's like a rolling, it's like a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like a wave.
Yeah. These are gradients, not on off.
Gradients. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. So during fasting, insulin levels drop, encouraging the body to burn fat for energy rather than glucose. So you burn through your glucose, you get your number to come down. And then if you continually do that over time, that's going to reduce the glycemic volatility. So it's going to make blood sugar less reactive to your meals. So you're going to have less big swings. Fasting clearly has shown to do this. Because it improves your glucose numbers and reduces your insulin resistance, right? So we've had messages all over the place over the years that fasting glucose has dropped from 105 to 85 after just 3 months of implementing fasting without making any big lifestyle overhaul, food choices, going to the gym 6 days a week, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'm not saying fasting is a magic pill, but it's going to stack the deck in your favor, especially at the beginning of your journey.
Correct. Yeah. And the more consistent you get with the fasting, and then start adding in those other pieces that you mentioned too, then now you're having an even greater impact and improvement on some of those spikes. Because if you can start to get those spikes to come down a little bit and not last for quite as long, guess what? The pancreas knows it doesn't need to send out as much insulin to combat those spikes, the ingestion-based spikes. And when you don't have to pump out as much insulin, then you get back into fat burning mode that much faster, because you don't have to wait quite as long for those levels to dissipate. And that's exactly why that kind of strings together, as far as success or maybe frustration, depending on what's going on with you underneath the surface.
So I want to mention a couple of things here is the delayed research, right? So research is kind of delayed. Typically, we'll
Sure.
start to, like 5 years ago when we started doing the podcast and we did research articles. There wasn't a lot to choose from, and then all of a sudden it was like boom, 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 boom. Men's studies, men and women's studies, diabetics, non-diabetics, healthy individuals, lean individuals, and it's now there's just so much more research on it because of the obesity and health epidemic that we have. So there's an article that came out in the Frontiers in Cardiovascular Medicine in 2020. And it said postprandial glucose spikes, meaning post-meal glucose spikes, an important contributor to cardiovascular disease and diabetes, ? And it's like, okay, maybe. So we see a lot of those changes in labs based off of the studies that we've gone through and the coaching that we see in the case studies that we have in our own personal experience. But there's a couple other things here that we mentioned why managing these fluctuations is important with fasting. Because one of the things we want to avoid is there's this concept of what's called metabolic memory, where high glucose exposure can lead to persistent increased CVD risk, even after blood glucose is lowered. And this is shown in the delayed benefits of glucose lowering treatments like metformin. Some people start taking it and there's a 2 to 4 week ramp where it's like, oh, now I'm starting to see my numbers come down. Well, guess what? Fasting can do pretty freaking quickly within probably 72 hours.
Kind of compress that timetable.
Yeah. Your blood sugar comes down and you're not messing with biochemistry. You're literally using a tried and true art of fasting. So one point of contention there for why we believe and why we feel fasting is so powerful. The second thing is we want this concept of what we call AGEs, or advanced glycation end products. So these are formed by irreversible sugar modifications of proteins. And what happens, these contribute to long-term vascular dysfunction. So a byproduct of glycolysis, which is the energy processing of our body, we bring food in, the liver processes, the blood sugar moves it into the cell, out of the cell. Insulin has a role in that. One of the major issues is the byproduct of that process, if it's dysfunctional, is directly related to and with cardiovascular disease and type 1 and type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
So there's almost like this autoimmune, we turn the thing on, and now what do? Well, managing with medication, probably not a long-term solution that a lot of people want to do. But in the short term, guess what? Again, fasting is going to be that powerful lever that you can pull. So Tommy, we've shifted our mindset here over the years where if you're struggling with consistency, or if you want to get to the longer fast, but you just can't, people typically do it wrong. And this is where we started too, is one of our first resources we created was the fast start guide, pick breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And 95% of people pick dinner just because it's easier, right?
Yeah. More social, more convenient. For sure.
Yeah. Well, we've since changed our mind on that. If you're going to skip a meal, skip dinner, eat breakfast and eat lunch. So how do I know we have a resource for this, but what's like the big takeaway on, like, if you're looking to push through, if you're looking to make consistent efforts with your fasting, now that we've talked about what the normal ranges should be, now we talk about the lever that you can pull rather than the let's just watch and wait method or medicate method. We want to encourage you to really push your fasting window and track your numbers so you can see it visually. But I would definitely recommend, if you're going to do a 16-8, switch it and get rid of that whole dinner thing and move to the whole breakfast, starting with breakfast and lunch, and eat and ending your eating earlier in the day.
That's a great point. Where if you have a 6 or an 8 hour nutrition opportunity window like that, being earlier in the day means a better physiological response to it. And so that means that the blood sugar spike that you do get after the meal is going to be lower and lesser and last for less time than earlier in the day than it would later on in the day. So that's kind of optimizing the physiology without changing your fasting time. But then you can go to the next step too, which would be to set yourself up to get some positive reinforcement for what you're doing, which means, hey, if you have a Keto Mojo or some other blood glucose monitor where you can take a blood sugar reading, after your next meal, after you break that fast, or take it a couple hours later and see where the spike kind of ended up and how long it took you to get that back down. Obviously, that's easier to do with a continuous glucose monitor, but if you don't have one, then you can kind of get some of the data like that too. And so what happens there is that you can see, okay, this was the spike, this was the high point. And then, okay, so what if next time you did that fast, you went a couple hours longer? So yes, that would make your meal timing a little bit later on in the day. But maybe there's even more benefit if you extended that fast just a little bit longer. Or what if you went into the next morning's breakfast instead of breaking it for dinner tonight? Right. And then see what that did as far as your blood sugar spike. You might get some positive reinforcement that that was a really good physiological move for you, which means that you got into more fat burning, and that can be really exciting and motivating for you to be more consistent and for you to take action on the next fast, which means you're going to now have more wins to string together rather than waiting longer and, frustration and confusion about what you should or shouldn't be doing. So that's a really cool way to kind of get feedback from your physiology, which is why we'll have a link also that you can actually grab a CGM from one of our partners, which is going to be cool too. So you can get that real-time feedback if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're looking for more guidance on getting more consistent, head to the show notes, click the link for the blueprint to fasting for fat loss. It'll show you some strategies on how to extend those fasts, and definitely want to shift those fasts to the morning. Now, the third lever or the third part of today's conversation, we want to talk about how we can optimize our food choices, right? If fasting's not, once you do fasting for a little while, fasting is the easy part. It's the food that trips a lot of people up, right? Sure, after thousands of surveys and thousands of challengers and hundreds and hundreds of coaching, it's like, this is what we talk about 90% of the time, is the societal, social, food, emotional connection to food, relationship to food kind of conversation. So, if anyone out there, this might relate, I'm going to do a 72-hour fast. Okay. And then you find yourself eating dinner that same day. You're like, what the hell happened? Or you're like, all right, I'm going to break my fast in this way. And then you find yourself in a drive-through line or saying yes to a happy hour dinner or, whatever it is. Right. Mm-hmm. So the food choice, the food decision part is really important. So, and we can't really talk about that, blood sugar oscillations in normal ranges, if we're not going to mention the benefits and or all the pitfalls of certain food choices. So we have a whole host. We are not dogmatic when it comes to food choices. It's your life. It's your lifestyle. What's the best plan for you? Well, the one you can stick to. Mm-hmm. The one thing we do stand firm on is refined, processed, sugar-laden, highly convenient foods. You want to stay away from those as the majority of your diet. Right? You don't want to be living on that stuff. But other than that, I'm more carnivore, pretty much strict carnivore these days. I feel better on it. My wife is a carbaholic. She is, she eats like 250 grams of carbs today, all natural, healthy stuff, sweet potatoes, jasmine rice, etc. But she's, like 15% body fat and has a 6-pack most of the time of the year. Right. So it's like, nice. And her labs are perfect. So, cause she's perfect if you're listening. So you can vary. It just depends on where you're at. So for us, starting off, foods to stabilize your blood sugar, you want to go to low glycemic, so lower carb, higher fiber, and protein-paced meals. Mm-hmm. So we focus on prioritizing protein because, Tommy, you like to say what?
Protein doesn't happen by accident.
Right. It needs to be intentional.
It has to
be.
You
usually got to cook it or clean it or,
save up money for it. You got to buy it. For it. Right. Yeah. It's the most expensive part of the plate.
Right. So lower glycemic, lower carb, not no carb, lower carb. Now, if you are a severe diabetic and your blood sugar is all over the map and you've got insulin and all the other stuff, then I would just say, let's just cut out carbs and get rid of it for a while, or make them so small that they're not volatile. Because some of y'all, there's variation from one to each other. We have an example here that you made me laugh when you said it earlier, Tommy.
Well, when we talk about individual examples, it's kind of like what happens in one person's body is different from what happens in another person's body. Like one person's banana might be another person's donut, literally with the physiological response. So, and banana is a great example too, because that's almost one of those kind of demonized foods as far as, when the
You're
low
eating
carb,
too much sugar. How many people do you know got diabetes because they ate too much fruit?
Too many bananas, right? It didn't happen. It didn't happen, let alone broccoli or something else like that. But, but too many donuts might do it to some of us, but not to others. And that's where the individual variance.
We all know these people and we hate them.
Yeah.
Right. They can eat whatever the hell they want, whenever they want. And they're just, so there is a metabolic genetic component here too.
Of course.
Depending on, but then we also know the people that don't look like diabetics, but they are.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. And so just understanding that you have a personal, response to different foods and getting feedback on what those responses are is really, really important. But you can still, even when you don't know that, you can still stack the deck more in your favor by prioritizing the protein, by putting the carbohydrate rich foods later on in the meal. And also planning to do things smart, like right after the meal. Hey, the more carbohydrates I had, let me plan for a bit of a longer walk after the meal, because we know that that's going to blunt the blood sugar response. We've talked about that over the last few weeks, and that's going to help because that's also going to blunt the insulin response as well. So you're going to see it in the visual feedback, and you're also going to feel it too. That directly goes against that post-meal lethargy that you mentioned earlier on in the conversation. Like, think the Thanksgiving quote unquote tryptophan. It's not the Thanksgiving tryptophan. It's the Thanksgiving insulin that leads to feeling like you just have to have a nap, like you've been hit by a truck, right?
Yeah, there's not enough tryptophan to tranquilize you on a Thanksgiving dinner. It's the food bolus. It's the insulin response. It's the blood sugar variation. It's the elevation. It's all of those things. So, when you're just to summarize, balanced meals, so protein, healthy fats, and fiber slow down digestion and ultimately slow down blood sugar spikes. Right. Mm-hmm. So some studies show adding fiber to a meal can reduce glucose spikes by up to 30%, and that's great. Now, like I said, I'm more carnivore. We have vegetarians and vegans in our group. You can make this work with all different lifestyles, which is why, for a small subpopulation, we recommend we've done episodes on this, like do a 90-day keto if you've got hormone imbalance issues, or go low carb or go paleo or go carnivore for a while. But like really just continue to be a work in progress rather than to be like, this is what I do forever.
Yeah.
Because that's just going to undermine your results. So
good point.
When we look at personalization, I love that what you said earlier, Tommy, one person's banana is another person's donut. We're all a little bit different. So you might be able to, it's like for me, I don't eat Mexican food out anymore. Every time I do, I don't feel good no matter what I choose. If I eat the chips and the salsa and the giant burrito covered in cheese, or I eat the taco salad with lean meat and dressing on the side, I still don't feel great. So there's just something in that food that doesn't agree with me.
That's your donut.
That's my donut, right? So the reality is, which my wife hates because she loves going to Mexican restaurants and having margaritas. But so there's just some simple things you can do in terms of food or food choices. And we talk about that, exactly what we believe in the blueprint as well. Mm-hmm. So, Tommy, let's recap here and give some takeaways. So, understanding blood sugar basics, why it's important, learn your numbers, why they matter. We talked about the inflammation, the oxidative stress, the connection to diabetes and cardiovascular risk and lifestyle issues, conditions, and decreased quality of life, in the later decades, and prevention of disease. And we talked about type 3 diabetes, which is now known as Alzheimer's, or Alzheimer's is now being known or referred to as type 3 diabetes because it is a blood sugar metabolic function issue. Then we talked about fasting for glucose stability, right? So pull that lever. That's a huge lever that you can pull. And then focusing on the food choices, is why we created the blood sugar guide, because we're going to put all this stuff into one place for you so you can either regain momentum or continue the momentum that you have through the holidays into 2025.
Yeah, read through the blood sugar guide. It's going to be eye-opening, and it's going to reinforce things that you probably already have, like a little bit of an inclination or an intuitive, like, I think this might be going on, even if you don't have that under the hood data just yet, which could be your next level up, maybe in your fasting lifestyle, might be getting some of that under the hood data. I know it was for me, and I know it was for you too, Scott. So just taking the perspective of like, when my blood sugar is lower, I'm in a better physiological state. And one thing you mentioned, the immune response too, just thinking about your body as a system, and just the fact that as your average blood sugar is lower, you're also more resilient to things like parasites and viruses and bacteria and even fungi as well, because they all feed off of blood sugar. So the higher your blood sugar is, the more you're feeding those things, and the more they can proliferate in your system. Versus lower blood sugar, you're a worse host for those things. So be a worse host for the things that you don't want to be hosting in your body, and get that feedback and use it to leverage into your fasting lifestyle so that you can continue making progress forward and continue to see how you might be able to extend your next fast, so you can spend more time in fat burning and less time in fat storage. And so, and watch how your cravings change too, as you get a handle on your blood sugar a little bit better. you all of a sudden get a handle on cravings a little bit better too, and your next food choice becomes a little bit more intuitive. So it's an amazing process here, and so we definitely want to be putting together these pieces for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially this time of year where people say, "Oh, it's cold and flu season." Well, it's also sugar, alcohol, Christmas cookies, consumption season too. So there is an immune connection to this as well. And being in practice with families for dozens of years, my wife's still in practice. Yeah, it's a reality. Like, yeah, you're going to be more susceptible if you're doing those things. Yes, all of this stuff is more active because of all of these decisions. I know for me and my kids, if they've had too much sugar or too many treats, the sniffles start, their sleep gets disrupted, their mood change. It's all connected, and blood sugar is such a big underlying thread. And fasting is such a big lever that you can pull to really improve, just overall function in general. So as we wish you a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays once again, head to the show notes, click the link, go back, listen to the last couple episodes. We talk about labs for 2025. We talk about how to navigate the holidays. So if you're heading to a Christmas Eve or a Christmas thing or a New Year's thing, and you're like, what am I going to do? Go listen to last week's episode, download the guide, grab the link. If you missed the last challenge of the year, don't worry. We got one coming up in January as well. That link will be in the show notes. You can find it on our website, thefastingforlife.com. Excited, Tommy. One more week left in 2025. And we're going to end the year with a bang and kick 2025 off with an even bigger one. So I'm excited for what's to come. Thank you all for listening, Tommy. As always, appreciate the conversation, sir. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.
So you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.